Thank you. On this dark and stormy night, I guess we're not going to turn lights. I guess we don't have to turn lights off. If you can see it, if you can't see it, you'll say something. If you can see it, whatever, close your eyes or something like that. So I start, now it's become a ritual for me. Well, this is too loud. It's become a ritual for me, and those of you who've seen my talks will forgive me, but I always start with these same two slides, which is an image of my mother, Sarah, who was who was born in Belarus, and they came to Palestine, now Israel, in 1933, and then the family came to New York in 1954. So I just spent a few weeks this summer in Belarus, traipsing through the little villages that my family came from, and getting water from the River Sluch, which is where she was, and so, you know, I'm not going back ever. One trip to Belarus is more than enough. Way more than enough, but it was, you know, of course it was amazing to see what wasn't there. But at any rate, so there was a displacement from one place when she was a young girl to Palestine, and then another displacement, she got married, and then another displacement. But as many people do, they moved to another country, and they came to the United States. So we grew up in the Bronx, in Riverdale, and my mother was very eccentric and very wonderful and very funny, and I had an incredible relationship with her. And one of the strongest assets that she had, among many, was not to tell us what to do and not to impose any kind of, this is what you need to know. There was, I always said that there's very little talking in my house, very little conversation, and nobody needed to know anything. So it was a kind of funny way to grow up, but a wonderful way to grow up. So when I was doing the piece for the New York Times, for the year of the New York Times after the Principles of Uncertainty, about American democracy and history and the pursuit of happiness, I was asking people to draw maps of the United States from memory, because it's a large country and it's a little bit complicated, and I'm quite certain, I mean, maybe some of you would disagree, that nobody would get it 100% right sitting down and quickly drawing it. You would get it right? You wouldn't get it right. Nobody would get it right. You might forget, and you might get it almost right, you know. And I had many dozens of people do it for me, but by far the best map came from my mother. And so I never tire of looking at this. I never tire of showing it. It was in my book, The Principles of Uncertainty. I refer to it constantly. And clearly you can see here that there's a little bit, you know, there's a different kind of brain working. And so endlessly amusing, endlessly wrong, you know, besides the obvious, like where all the states are, besides that, South Carolina is on top of North Carolina. So complete obliviousness to any kind of real information. And there's Tel Aviv and Lenin, the village that she came from, in Jerusalem, are on the bottom right. And sorry, the rest unknown, thank you through the center, basically sorry, the rest unknown, that's it. That's all you get, and I really couldn't care less. And that, to me, that was the most inspiring thing in the world, and I have it on the wall. I mean, that way of thinking is so inspiring, because it's not about getting it right, it's just about just doing it the way you would do it. And she wasn't doing a Saul Steinberg parody, she didn't know about that, she wasn't being, you know, coy or artistic, she was just being herself. So it was really an incredible thing for me incredible person for me to grow up with, and an incredible way to look at work, which is how I look at everything that I do, which is what is the most personal, inventive, humor-filled way of being a journalist and going out and coming back and reporting on what I've seen, and usually the digression and being off point is much more interesting than being on point, or for me it is anyway. So. And that's wavy. So after many books and many years of doing projects, it became clear that dogs have been an obsession for me for a long time, and way before the fact before I got my dog Pete. So I talk about there are trees, glorious, and, you know, I take walks every day, and the most important thing for me is not, you know, it's in, you know, what you read in the book is not thinking, having an empty brain, which I think is the most glorious state, because it doesn't mean you're stupid, though that's also kind of wonderful, but it means your brain is really free and clear and ready to receive whatever information is out there that might be wonderful to receive. So I go for many walks in the city, and I love to observe things. And I say there are trees, glorious and consoling, changing with the seasons, reminders that all things change and change again. There are flowers, birds, babies, buildings. I love all of these, but above all, I am besotted by dogs. So, but before I had a dog, I was terrified of all dogs. And I think that that's probably the best example of how I was brought up to imagine dogs. And that again was a legacy of my mother and her mother too, that in Belarus, there were a lot of dogs that were very vicious, and so one learned to be careful. And the other thing was cleanly, this obsession with having a clean home, like a spotless home, and that an animal certainly has no place in there. And I say, we had a goldfish for a few weeks, and that didn't work. That ended badly. That ended very badly. But, and I think I had a hamster once that jumped out the window. So the history, the legacy of animals in our home is very alien. They're alien creatures. And the subtext is, of course, you can't trust anybody, especially you can't trust people, and why would you trust animals? And my mother's famous line to me was always, if everybody said what they were really thinking, nobody would be speaking to anybody. That's an interesting thing to get from your family, just like clearly everything is everything underneath the facade of politeness is just horror and terror. So it makes you wonder, and a lot of people agree with that, which makes it even stranger because, of course, I'm thinking horrible thoughts all the time. So clearly, all of you are. I don't even know what we're doing here. So anyway, so that was my vision of a dog. And then, of course, and then time passed, and for a very sad reason, my husband being ill, we were given the advice that a dog would be an incredible source of comfort and happiness and solace to our little children and to all of us. And in fact, that's exactly what happened, that this amazing creature, who I was terrified to touch who first came into the house, I probably would have given CPR to by the time that we had spent a few years together. So there are many dogs that I've fallen in love with and write about. Pete was the dog that we got, of course, but this is Krupnik, and Krupnik is a dog who lives in a bookstore in Tel Aviv. And Krupnik is incredibly disdainful of just about everybody. And it's interesting because I say, well, he hasn't read a single book in the store, but you walk in and you feel that he is completely superior. And so I really, I admire him for that. I admire him for that superiority. But I painted him over and over again. And I put him in scenes where he doesn't belong, and I put him in contexts that are other than a bookstore in Tel Aviv. And so Pete was an Irish Wheaton, and we were going to call him Einstein, but we discovered he's clearly no Einstein quite quickly, so we decided to call him Pete. And he really became my muse and my comfort and my solace and my best friend and my therapist and every other thing that you can imagine about a dog. And I forced him to model for me. And of course now, it's, this was a few years ago, like some years ago. So now, to be politically correct, I probably shouldn't even show you these things, that I made him wear my glasses, and he probably got a headache from it. But the notion that he was somebody who was game and didn't complain and was patient and unconditionally accepting and never said a word, of course, was something that was extraordinary in our relationship. And so I took advantage of it, of course, as we all do. With people who are kind to us, we take advantage of them. So he became ill, and in the way that you do with dogs because they can't say what they want or don't want, we kept him alive for probably longer than we should have, and it was impossible to say goodbye. It was impossible to part with him. But when we did, it was an extraordinary day. It was snowing in New York. It was incredibly quiet, and we had taken him to the vet and said goodbye, and then read this passage from James Joyce when we came home: the snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling like the descent of their last end upon all the living and the dead. And somehow, those, of course, we live in this world, and everyone experiences tragedy and loss and heartbreak, sometimes quite often, sometimes on a daily basis, more or less, depending on the intensity of it. So to acknowledge, one of the things that I've learned through that, and it's not a constant state, is how the state of happiness and the state of sadness coexist at the exact same time, in the exact same moment, in the exact same place. It's something about physics there, and that they are not separable, and they're not only separable. You kind of don't want them to, or you can't separate them. So that was one of the bigger lessons that I learned from the relationship with Pete. So the book is a compendium of and tribute to the many dogs I've encountered over the years in life and in books. They are constant reminders that life reveals the best of itself when we live fully in the moment and extend our unconditional love. And it is very true that the most tender, uncomplicated, most generous part of our being blossoms without any effort when it comes to the love of a dog. And of course, I have children who I love very much, but it's different. And so, during our years together, I often ask Pete to say one word to me, just one word. It is like asking to hear one word from a loved one who has died. Give me a sign you have not really left me. It is not going to happen, but it does not stop you from wishing and hoping for a miracle. So I would beg Pete to say one word. He never did, but of course he spoke volumes. So there he is in the sweater that my mother made him. My mother also became, I mean, it's really interesting that my mother also fell in love with him, and he suffered through endless fittings for his couture sweater, and then she ended up making him platters of blintzes and schnitzel, which I think probably killed him, but that we weren't allowed to touch. So that's the story of Pete. Thank you. That's the end. But we could, so we can talk and say if there are any questions or wonderings or thoughts or anything like that about anything, or not. Yeah?
You have a dog now?
I don't have a dog now. You know, in our family we say I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid. But no, so I travel. You know, I have the I travel so much excuse. But clearly, something has prevented me on many different levels from getting another dog. I don't think I could duplicate. I can't imagine that I could duplicate such a relationship that I had with him, where he became my muse and I wrote about him. But you never know. So things could change as they changed before.
Do your kids have dogs?
My son, who lives in the city, does not. But that's what we're talking about. How can we do a family ownership? And my daughter lives in Vermont, and she would have 30 dogs, though she only has one and a cat. But you know, we all think that, you know, I write about it in the great houses when I was growing up, and then, you know, that I would see beautiful pages from Life magazine and Vogue, and see these glorious families with their glorious dogs and great mansions in England, and I went, now that's something. And now I think that would really be great to live in a great, so I'm waiting to live in a great house in England. I guess with lots of servants or something and lots of dogs. But, you know, it's like Queen Victoria with her 1,000 pugs, or, you know, of course, Queen Elizabeth with her many corgis. But there's something about the expansiveness of that's very interesting. Yeah?
I'm wondering if you'd say anything about the development of your hand lettering style. It's one thing to be like a painter or a gouache artist, and then it's another thing to develop the lettering, and something I'm interested in doing. Do you have advice about that?
Well, I don't have advice, but I'll tell you, you know, lettering and typography is really important to me. As my husband and I had a design studio, and so we really cared about that. So to the point that my daughter Lulu's middle name is Bodoni. For those of you who know that, that's one of the most divine typefaces. And we made a pilgrimage to Parma, where Bodoni lived and where the museum is, and, you know, and also to have Parmigiano prosciutto, other things. But so the first came my love of penmanship when I was in grade school, and the sense that this is art. Drawing letters is as satisfying as anything else. And then later becoming more sophisticated and loving typography, and then of course looking at all the history of typography in all of its forms, whether it's the Dadaists using it or the Futurists using it in the way that they did, or, you know, 15th century calligraphy, and So it's endless how beautiful lettering is, and then it's also a little bit faster and cheaper to have handwritten text. So, but it felt like that was part of the narrative for me, and that when I'm looking at the page, I designed the book, and I'm designing the page, and I'm imagining, room for type is what we always said on the page. You have, you're designing the page with room for type, and it's really glorious to have that as an extra part of the conversation. So I don't have advice for you other than just, practice your penmanship. Yeah.
Did your love of Pete expand to include love of animals in general?
It's funny because I didn't realize that, but it's true. I fell in love with many animals. Shrews, for instance, lemurs. I just learned how to say lemurs yesterday. I thought it was lemur, and I didn't, but I couldn't, I was trying to tell somebody about this animal, and they said, I don't know what you're saying. So finally we got to lemur, which it's hard to remember. But yeah, I mean, the idea that I met a great bunny named Percy. I am falling in love with other animals, it's true. I don't know what's going to happen. But I do love, the idea that there we are all alive. It gives you pause. Yeah.
Any ideas on how I can persuade my 93-year-old father, who lives in a sort of mellow depression from day to day, to get another dog, and he keeps saying, no more dogs every time I bring him?
You'd have to bring a person in with the dog for him, I think. So you'd have to bring like somebody to tend to the dog. It might seem to be too daunting to take care of it before he will. Yeah, yeah. It's too much. But he could visit dogs in a shelter.
He visits.
Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's enough. Yeah. Yep.
Did you start drawing dogs just because you love Pete so much, or did you have lessons in drawing, or did you just...
I just started to draw. I thought I was going to be a writer, and as the years, and I was probably about 8 years old, I read Pippi Longstocking and The Secret Garden. I said, that's it, I'm going to be a writer. But I went through the high school angst years, the horrible purple poetry, the terrible prose, and I thought there must be a way for me to express myself that wouldn't be so laden with words, wouldn't get in my way. And I decided I would start to draw. And at that time, there were a lot of influences around. Saul Steinberg had a huge retrospective that was very, very important. Ludwig Bellmans, of course, was writing and illustrating books for adults and children. So I saw that there was a way to create work that was narrative and literary, but was not writing. And then when about 10 years later, we were working for the Talking Heads. So I was just painting and drawing my own style. And then working with the Talking Heads, doing their graphic design, was the opportunity to collaborate with David Byrne on the first children's book. So the projects kind of grew organically, and then I wrote my own book, Hey Will You See the Pyramids, saying, oh, okay, now I can go back to writing, and it'll be very terse, it'll be very succinct, but it'll still have a relationship to the paintings, and so they work back and forth, and that's what developed. So I didn't go to school for painting.
Are these watercolors?
Gouache. They're gouache. And I'm starting to look at oils just to see, how I can terrify myself. Too comfortable in gouache, so it's an interesting conversation, but yeah.
Any next book on the horizon?
There are many books on the horizon. One about cakes that I'm writing. I'm collaborating with a cookbook author, and I'm writing stories which are surprising me for their sadness. And I say, this is a really festive topic, but the stories are actually very melancholy at this moment. And then I'm collaborating with Daniel Handler, who's also Lemony Snicket, on another book for MoMA. And then the one that's really capturing my heart is I'm doing an illustrated edition of the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. So this is 3 books down the line, but it's still, something that I'm immersing myself in, of course, in Gertrude's world, and have vast library of books about her and about all of them. So it's amazing. So that's just, some of the books that are happening. And I'm also co-creating a ballet with John Higginbotham, who used to dance with Mark Morris, for those of you who know him. So we just came back from Jacob's Pillow, working on a piece that will premiere in 2017 at Jacob's Pillow. So it's, again, another way to terrify myself. Yeah, I'm terrified.
A book like this, how long, is it something you write in a week? Or something you write in 2 years or 3 months?
Well, it's something in between 3 months and 2 years. And I just want to respond also that I've been painting dogs forever, way before I got Pete, because I was so enamored of their persona on the street as funny characters, and they were much more cartoony in the beginning. As my style developed, I'm more painterly now, but from the very beginning I put dogs where they were not supposed to be. For clearly I was obsessed with them from the beginning, and so, what was the question?
It takes you...
Oh, yeah, it takes me a long time, because I forget things, yeah.
Just knock out these books and a ballet and...
Yeah, I just, knock it out. It takes more than a week. It's like bigger than a bread box, but smaller than an elephant. I'm always ruminating about books for years. Gertrude, I'm reading, I'm sketching, I'm thinking, I'm looking at the book itself, and just, but once I'm actually sitting down to work on a book, it's probably like, 6 to 8 months. That's not the only thing I'm doing, so if I were only doing one thing, it would probably be less time. But that sense of alternating between other projects and, magazine work and travel and all kinds of things. So there's a lot of, there's a constant productivity, but it's not defined by sitting down and doing one thing, which drives you a little, maybe not you, but drives me a little bit crazy. But it just seems that that's the way the world is now for me. So, but, years, a year, something like that.
Better to do a lot of things at once rather than just concentrate on one.
No, I would much rather concentrate on one thing at a time, but it just doesn't work that way in the scheduling of the world. At this, anyway, in my world, Yeah.
I really enjoyed the coverage you've done for the New Yorker, and I wondered how those come about. I mean, some of the other covers that they do are so topical to current events, but yours are, some of them seasonal, I think.
Right.
Are there some in the pipeline that we might see?
There are none in the pipeline. The New Yorker, I have a beautiful stack of rejection slips from the New Yorker from the earlier days. And then as my career grew and I was doing more work, Françoise Mouly got in touch with me and said, would you like to do a cover? So I think that's the way it most often happens, that somebody connects you to somebody and then they think, would you like to do this? Then you get a list of the subjects, of the cover subjects for the entire year, and you can pitch them. You can see if you have other ideas that are not topical, just seasonal, as you say. The New Yorker stand cover, of course, was an exception, and it was something that we did very quickly and responded to unexpectedly for at 9/11. So that cover, again, with humor, dealing with a tragic situation. So, I also pitch them a lot of interior pieces that I'm doing about. I've done like 15 or 20 pieces about things that I've seen, so writing and painting on the interior. And they reject as many things, if not more. There's no, there's no guarantee. You can send it, you can think, this is a shoe-in, and then they'll say, what were you thinking? We have no interest in this whatsoever. So it's an interesting relationship that you can't, and it also is interesting always. You can't take anything for granted. You can't take any relationship, this is always going to be this way, it changes. So, and so it's fine, it's interesting.
I did put in a good word for you. I met Françoise at Ben.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the
That's very sweet of you.
I haven't had one in a while.
Yeah. She wrote to me too. Well, then she wrote to me and said, we haven't had one in a while. What's going on? But, sometimes you just don't have any ideas. Some people are fantastically prolific. Barry Blitt, for instance, is an extraordinary cover artist, and just, and I'm just, happily doing other things, and I forget. So that's nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about your kind of evolution of artistic identity? A little bit less about the book, but in terms of kind of this interdisciplinary, having so many commas after your name and all the things you do, I'm just curious about, I feel like as as younger artists, you're encouraged to focus on one discipline or one manifestation of your creativity, and And I think that, there's this jack of all, master of none that people are so cautionary about. I'm just kind of curious about your evolution towards embodying all of those. I mean, I just took my mother to see your mother's closet. So there's the huge range, and I'm at your pop deck, so I saw Lincoln's watch, and just
right, yeah.
wondering if you could speak about that.
Right. God, that's really nice too. That my mother's closet is. My son has the smallest museum, maybe in the world, on Cortlandt Alley. It's called Museum, 2 M's in the front and 2 M's at the end, and it's in a defunct elevator shaft, and it's a kind of museum of cultural anthropology, which he started. He was a filmmaker at Bard, and then he kind of branched into other areas, and then down the alley in a little niche that became available, we did a recreation of my mother's underwear closet, her linen closet, and her majestic bras and such. But which is going to travel and go to museums around the world, which is kind of hilarious and fabulous. But at any rate, so what I want to say about that is that all of the projects that I've done and all of the ideas that I've done are because I haven't known exactly what I am, and I have never thought it would make any sense not to try any idea that I had. I mean, the worst that could happen is that it would fail, or I would get bored, or it wouldn't go anywhere, and then you find out, okay, it didn't go anywhere. But I think that goes back to my mother saying, or not saying anything about my thought process, not saying, well, you should do this or this or this. It was completely, you can do whatever you want. And so, and I married a man, I met a man, and my husband was, when we were 18, we met when we were 18, and we both had this kind of ambicuriousness, you don't have to define who you are, and he was quite fearless about going into any territory that he thought he would be interested in doing, and that if you apply your intelligence, you can solve any problem. If you don't, you don't, then you find out. But if you do, onward. And so that was a lesson that I learned, that the worst thing to do would be not to try anything, even if it's out of your discipline. Like, what am I doing co-creating this ballet? And it's a very interesting dialogue, because a lot of the time I just wake up in the middle of the night and I do see, catastrophe written on the ceiling. And I think I'm just completely a fool. And then I wake up and I have a cup of coffee and I think, well, okay, maybe I'm a fool, but I'll find out. So it really, everybody has their own story and their own need. I clearly have a need to do many different things. So there you are. You have to do it, otherwise you're sunk. Is that a good note to end on, or should we?
Can you talk about how you usually come up with a book? Do you usually have the idea first and you talk with the editor? How does that work?
The books, it's funny, because when I think about it, I actually have no idea how they came about. And I think, wow, where do these books come from? And that's actually a nice thing, that they're kind of random conversations, there's random wandering around, there's talking to people, there are themes that keep coming up, and then something kind of reveals itself, as we say, as opposed to being, determined to find an idea, that the ideas kind of show themselves, and then and your instinct guides you, and your sense. So yes, and then I talk to my agent, the wonderful Charlotte Sheedy, and then I talk to the different editors that I know and see who would be interested, and ideas also appear from other people. I get a phone call and somebody says, would you like to collaborate on this, like Lemony Snicket or something like that. So it comes in a range of ways, but the most important thing also is, what is your instinct telling you about this project? Is it interesting, and is it fulfilling, and and sometimes, and how does it fit into the scheme of things? So it actually feels easy in a way, though I don't know what that means, but it just comes to you. You make a lot of lists, and then you cross things off. And then whatever comes up, it's the way when I was doing the New York Times stuff, the principles of uncertainty, is that whatever themes keep coming up to you that are important, you say, well, I have to listen to this. Something is, I'm talking to myself, so I better listen. What do you think?
I think this is great. Thank you. I just want to say thank you for being
Thank you
here.
very much.
I'm Nancy Wyden. My grandfather founded the store 88 years ago, so and I wouldn't miss this.
That's great.
And you've
That's
been
very
coming
sweet.
in here for.
I live here. I
Yes.
live 2 blocks away. I literally the library. You should come to my apartment and see what's there.
It's a mini Strand.
Yeah, it's a mini.
okay, we
It
can open
really
up.
is.
It's a branch.
It's a branch of the Strand. Yeah. So thank you.
And I don't know if you noticed it, but we today, this year, changed our bags around, and we all got together and we said, like, who are our favorite artists and who are our favorite authors. And of course, your name is on there.
Oh my God! I
So
didn't
not
even
only do
know
you get to
that.
buy a book,
That's
but you
really
get to buy a
sweet.
bag.
Oh, I need a bag. Well, thank you. It's very sweet. Thank you very much. Very lovely of you.
So I guess we have other
Hey.
copies of other things for sale. I know I read your kids' books to, the Max and the Lincoln one to my kids every night. But I guess she'll be signing here.
Am I signing here? Am I going
Yep,
here? Okay.
and there are other books
Yeah.
there. And I guess your kids came too.
My kids showed up, Lulu and Alex, who I also forced to model for me at all times of the night or day. And they wonder whether the dog who loves who more, right? I don't know. You know, right?
Thank you all for coming.